Hello, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Bewley. I'm the Dairy Housing and Analytics Specialist at Alltech, the global animal nutrition company. I'm also a lean farming master trainer, which means I've been trained by the company called Lean Farming with Suzanne Peistrup in concepts of lean farming. Lean is a relatively new concept in agriculture. It's just recently been introduced, but it's actually been applied in many other industries for decades. It started in manufacturing, and these concepts bring new ways of thinking about how to improve efficiency in our livestock operations. We're going to talk to you today about some of the basic strategies and concepts of lean and how they might help you improve the efficiencies of your dairy operation. The basic idea of lean manufacturing is that we want to improve the flow within the system. We want to help identify quality issues in an effort to eliminate forms of waste. We need to be flexible toward change. All this involves getting the right things in the right place at the right time, at the right quantity, which ultimately leads to reduced waste, increased quality, reduced production time, and reduced production cost. Lean is a focus on continuous improvement and a pursuit of perfection. Again, we want to eliminate waste, improve productivity, reduce time involved in processes, improve the quality of what we're producing, reduce cost, and improve customer satisfaction. All of this will help improve the profitability of the business through simple and common sense approaches. A lot of the terms in lean come from Japan because that's where a lot of the lean concepts started. And one of the change terms is Kaizen. Kaizen means change is good. And Kaizen ultimately helps lead to success. One of the other ideas within lean is that we move toward being more proactive instead of being reactive. There's a picture here of cows out by a gas station, obviously not where they're supposed to be. This is a reactive means to managing where animals are, as opposed to perhaps being more proactive in managing and preventing fence damage so the cows don't get out in the first place. Another idea within lean is to work smarter rather than work harder. And I show this picture because it makes me think of a few years ago of measuring dairy facilities with students where they would want to measure every single thing in the barn. For example, measuring the width of every stall instead of measuring the width of one stall and extending that same width applies to most of the stalls in the operation. And when I told students this is what we should do, they said, "Oh, but Dr. Bewley, that's lazy." Well, there's a fine line between being lazy and being smart. And a lot of what we do in agriculture, I think we take such pride in our work ethic that we forget to think about where there might be smarter ways to do things that might require less effort and less time. Lean in dairy is the extra gear. It's focusing on not just giving living calves, but instead of just living calves, we have big calves. Even the best can be better with lean. We focus on just doing what creates value. For example, having too many heifers doesn't create value. We learn to see waste in production and in processes. And lean helps to give employees more motivation and engagement. Part of that is through a concept called a whiteboard meeting, which is a visible form of leadership. People want to be involved, they want to contribute, and lean provides a mechanism to help make sure they have that opportunity. Lean involves all employees. This table shows how many more ideas we get if we take the ideas of all of our employees. If we have one employee and they bring in five new ideas every quarter, we just have a total of five new ideas for the operation. If we have four and they each bring five, we have a total of 20. If we have 440 and they each bring five, we have a total of 2,200 new ideas. So we just get more new ideas by involving and engaging in employees, the people that are involved directly in the processes. Great opportunities come from actually listening to the staff, listening to the people that are involved in the individual processes. Lean has to do with minimizing firefighting. So, this is a study where they looked at the number of hours worked per week in a 600 cow farm. And you can see in this a tremendous amount of variation from a low week of 278 hours to a high week of 413 hours. So, that happens when we are not proactive, when we're reactive, and we start doing a lot of firefighting. The idea behind lean is to improve the processes so that we have a more stable workflow instead of those weeks when we're either light or heavy on the amount of work that we do. There are 5 basic principles of lean, and we're going to cover each of these here today. We focus on continuous improvement. Again, that idea of Kaizen, change is good. We focus on value for the customer, and the customer is a little bit different here. It doesn't necessarily mean the person that's consuming the dairy product, it's the next step in the process. We want to focus on mapping the value stream and removing waste in the process. We try to create flow in the system, and we move from push production to pull production. So this is kind of an example of what we mean by the customer is the next step in the process. Here we have feed delivery and feed mixing. The customer in that case is the cow, not the person consuming the milk, it's the cow. So when we think about the value stream, it's how do we deliver the highest quality feed in the right place at the right time, in the right quality, in the right amount to the cows. Let's think about this in another way. Imagine that you are ordering feed and you order 20 packages of 220 pounds of feed to be delivered every Thursday. Would you be okay if instead one time it's 16 packages and another time it's 24? Also, they don't arrive on Thursday, some arrive on Friday. And there's not 220 pounds in the package, but instead it's 150 pounds and 200 pounds, and one of the packages is broken. What would you do? Chances are, as a customer of a feed mill, you would look for a new supplier. Let's extend that to thinking about within the system when you're both the supplier and the customer. Imagine that you order 20 heifer calves at 220 pounds and they're supposed to be delivered every Thursday. Would you be okay then if you had 16 one Thursday and 24 on another? Oh, but also they don't arrive on Thursday. They actually get there Friday. They're not 220 pounds. Some are 150 pounds. Some are 200 pounds. And one of the calves is sick. What do you do? We just deal with this. But by focusing on lean processes, we can help to minimize that variation the same way that we would want to minimize the variation if we're receiving feed from a feed mill. We focus on creating flow in every process. So we can think of a few areas within dairy where that's very easy to strategize the milking process. We often focus on that in improving flow, improving throughput within the milking parlor, but also in terms of how we deliver feed. I have a picture here of a dairy that I worked with in Idaho a few months ago. I was extremely impressed by their feed delivery and feed mixing system. They built this barn where they strategized flow of the feed process to maximize efficiency, to minimize waste, and they actually reduced shrink and reduced the amount of time required to mix and deliver feed so much that they reduced their total cost of production by $1 per hundredweight. This is a massive improvement just by focusing on improving efficiencies. So, this is a perfect example of lean in action. We also focus on moving from push to pull. Let's think about this in terms of cheeseburgers. So we have 2 different ways we could manage cheeseburger delivery. We could have a scenario where we get to the store in the morning and we produce 200 cheeseburgers and we just hope that there's 200 customers that come in. But when we do that, maybe we have fewer customers than that and we end up wasting cheeseburgers at the end of the day. Maybe we have more and we have to turn customers away, or we have to restart our equipment and have a delay, or perhaps even just as bad, we have all these cheeseburgers sitting under the light. They're not as fresh and they don't taste as good and they leave a bad customer experience and reduce the likelihood that that customer comes back for a future visit. That's push production. Pull production is really what McDonald's does, where they're going to produce a cheeseburger only when it's ordered. So pull production is much more efficient, reduces waste, and focuses on a higher quality experience for the customer. We have similar examples within dairy. The best example we can probably all think of is with heifers. We often follow a push production strategy. What I mean by this is we assume that if a heifer is born, she's going to eventually be a milking cow in the herd. And by doing that, we sometimes push older animals out the door. We're clearing space for the new animal. And in doing that, we have more animals in first lactation, and therefore they don't produce as much milk, and we limit our production capacity. But also, perhaps we have more heifers raised than what we need to raise, which also has a big impact on our cost of production. Full production would be where we say, if I have a culling rate of 30% in a 100 cow herd, then I'm going to need 30 heifers a year. And I strategize to arrange to where I deliver 30 heifers per year instead of push production. That's how we can improve efficiencies in dairy operations. Big part of dairy lean is focusing on how we can increase value and reduce waste. And there are 8 basic types of waste in lean production: defects, overproduction, waiting, non utilized talent, transportation, inventory, motion, and extra processing. And we're going to go through each of these with dairy examples now. Defects. Examples of defects would be unclear routines, sick animals, dead animals, bad feed, bad communication. These are all defects that we can manage and improve within our dairy operation. And certainly, feed is a huge example of that. Feed, as we know, is the biggest cost in a dairy operation. And we see 4 examples of silage piles here with massive differences in the amount of waste. And these have huge impacts on the bottom line for a dairy operation. So lean would be focusing on trying to get a silage pile that looks more like the pile that we have in the upper left or the bottom right, as opposed to the bottom left or the upper right. Another type of waste is overproduction. This would be more milk than what can be sold for the best price, more heifers than cows that we need for replacement, or more feed than we actually need. Or waiting. Waiting is another type of waste. This would be when we're waiting for water to run, or milk to warm, or a cow waiting to go into the robot. We might be waiting for a machine or waiting for a colleague. How much time do we spend waiting for a colleague? That's really disrespectful and ultimately leads to inefficiencies within the system. Another type of waste is non utilization of talent. This is when we don't ask our people their opinions for how we can improve the processes. It's when we have people in the wrong place. Too often we put somebody in a position just because that was the next position that was available, but it might not have best fit the needs and interests and talents of that particular person. For example, I'm not necessarily a detail person, so it's probably not that great of an idea to put me in a detail position. If you want ideas, if you want big picture thinking, that's where I'm going to strive. And I think we all know what our strengths and weaknesses are, and we need to communicate with our employees to make sure we have people working in their most useful positions. It also might be working only with the hands and not the heads. We don't explain to employees why we're doing things or why it's important to the operation that they do them the right way. Another type of waste is transportation waste. We might have too large of machinery, too small of machinery. We transport things too long or too often. We drive around with an empty tractor or an empty truck. Feed storage in the field. animals in more locations than are necessary, or just bad logistics. So many times I see operations where you can see they just stage expansion without necessarily planning for the long term. And we create scenarios where we have bad cow flow and people flow and equipment flow that could have been avoided if we thought about logistics, thinking longer term about where that operation might go. Another type of waste is inventory waste. This is where we have too large a production just in case we purchase too much, or we have spare parts in many and small places. I think about my closet where I have a drawer where I store all kinds of gadgets and cords and cables and so forth. I have things in there that probably are for equipment that wouldn't even run today, but I keep it just in case. That's not lean. That's an example of waste. And it's so overwhelming to see that and to work through that drawer that sometimes I find it easier just to go buy a new cable than see if that cable is actually in that drawer. Another type of waste is motion. We might feed with the wrong shovels, the wrong posture, searching for things and searching for tools. We might use the wrong procedure. We might have things at the wrong height. I show the picture here on the right as an example of a dairy farm that I worked with a couple of years ago, where the gentleman that owned the farm were rather tall, and their milker, she was rather short, and she couldn't reach the cows without putting a bucket down to stand on the bucket to reach the cows. So she would move that bucket between every cow in every stage of the milking process. And you can imagine the look on this woman's face. She was just distraught and frustrated with this, and she was clearly not happy in that milking parlor. And I suggested it would be very easy to do something like this dairy producer did, where they just had a plank here for that person to walk on so they could reach without having to put a bucket down. So we can make little changes like that to really improve the work environment for our employees. Another type of waste is extra processing. We might clean too much. We might treat farm animals like pets, or dirty fans, like we have in the picture here. Dirty fan is a great example of extra processing because we have a fan that costs the same whether it's clean or dirty. It costs the same to turn the electricity on to run that fan, but we are not getting the full value out of that fan when it's this dirty. Another thing that we want to do is map the value stream. And this is a process. It takes some time. It takes employees to really map the value stream, but it can really be of tremendous value. So a value stream might be moving from feed production to milk production to dairy processing, feeding cows to managing cows to milking cows. We think about the suppliers and the customers. So the cows are suppliers of calves. The feed ends up going to the cows, etc. This is an example of value stream mapping. As you can see, multiple employees involved in the process of mapping out each stage in the process so that we can look for opportunities to reduce waste. The idea is to go to Gemba. Gemba is where value is created. We watch the work, we watch the flow, we watch the workplace, we record the time, and we make spaghetti diagrams. This is an example of a spaghetti diagram. Basically, we're looking at all the movement here in this example of a feed system. So we're moving and recording all that movement and looking to see, is there an opportunity to improve the process if we move the location of one type of feed to where another type is? We move where we have the tractor during the mixing process, that sort of thing, to look for opportunities to improve efficiencies. When we do this, we're going to record how much time each step in the process takes, and we want to divide things into value added and non-value added activities. We want to focus on customer demand. What's the optimal delivery from the customer's point of view? So the customer's point of view when it comes to feed delivery, it's the cow. We want to give that cow a quality ration with minimal variation and a fresh ration. We've got to think about her needs and how we get to that. When we do value stream mapping, we don't start with negativity. Don't say we can't do that. That doesn't work. We've got to think about what would the ideal situation be and how can we manage to get as close as possible to that ideal situation. To do this, we're going to start with the current state. we're going to define what the ideal state would be and end up with a future state. To map the current process, we want to map the situation right now. Think about putting customer demand on the right, supplier delivery on the left, and we use a yellow post-it note for each process in the step. Then we think about the future state. Map the ideal situation. How could we make it there? How could we focus without waste? Calculate the lead time and processing time under the new scenario. And then we think about that gap between the current and future state, find those wastes, prioritize where we can change things based on the amount of effort and impact, and then make an action plan, make a project plan to get to that future state. So here's another example of mapping the process of milking in a robot barn. You can see again, it's a team process. Everybody in the operation is involved in this to do that value stream mapping. Here's an example if we think about perhaps doing value stream mapping with a rotary milking parlor. Each line here represents the movement of a different person. And you can see in this scenario, we have a lot of crossover, a lot of movement. There's clearly no strategy in how people milk and move animals to the system. This is the current state. But then we could map out the future state where we say, rather than have all that chaos, let's control the process. Let's have specific spots for somebody to pre-dip, somebody to attach the units, somebody to post-dip, and somebody that's moving animals back and forth between the pens. So this is an example of how we can really improve the process by doing that spaghetti diagram here, where we have lots of movement, lots of inefficiency, and focusing on a more efficient future state. We want to focus on the big picture, how we can get new ideas to improve teamwork, to improve the education of the people, and ultimately, of course, those new ideas hopefully lead to more money for the operation. A big part of the lean system is what's called a whiteboard meeting. So as you can see here, whiteboards are just white marker boards. There can be lots of different things that we could include on the whiteboard. The whiteboard meeting is a standing meeting. Everybody stands around the whiteboard. The basic idea behind that is that we don't get too comfortable sitting down. We don't extend the length of the meeting just because we're comfortable and we don't want to move. It keeps everybody more engaged. We keep these meetings short. They're only 15-minute meetings. They're not a waste of time. We're not meeting just for the sake of meeting. And we have a very fixed and known agenda. So we have that agenda. We look for what we've done in the past week, what we're going to do in the next week, where our results are, and where we had waste and potential improvements in the system. We try to involve all the staff in the continuous improvement. Remember Kaizen, change is good. We want to involve people in a systematic way so we get more responsibility, more ideas, more motivation. We spend less time controlling. We create that culture of continuous improvement and that culture of continuous problem solving. We try to keep things positive, appreciative inquiry. All things have a good side and a bad side. What can we learn from the mistakes that we made? Try to return from negativity to positivity quickly. What can I do better instead of, hey, he forgot to do that? We provide that opportunity to praise. It's great that you found that sick cow. Try to avoid irony and sarcasm. Those tend to set a negative tone. And if someone must be corrected, speak to them alone. Appreciative management, that basic idea, we want to make sure we understand and recognize that everybody has a story of success. Focus on what's working rather than what's not working. Remember, people are different. We all have different competencies, which can be useful. Try to recognize good performance, create that culture of continuous dialogue, celebrate small victories, and speak up to the staff rather than down to the staff. Again, we're going to focus on continuous improvements. We're going to find waste in the system. We want to prioritize those, test our new solutions, and implement and improve them. This is a nice matrix for thinking about how to manage priorities. So we can see on the vertical axis, we go from low impact to high impact. And on the horizontal axis, we go from low effort to high effort. And we divide that into 4 quadrants. So in the top left, we have low effort, high impact activities. These are things we should strategize and implement soon. On the bottom left quadrant, we have low impact, low effort. Those are things we might want to think about implementing. On the upper right, we have high effort, high impact. Those are challenges. We may do those. They may be more long term. And then we have high effort, low impact activities in the bottom right quadrant. And those are things that we probably are not going to pursue. But this is a great way to think about how to set priorities. Divide things into this category and use that to determine whether or not we should take action or when we should take action. Another strategy is to think about this PDCA cycle: plan, do, check, and act. So we start with planning. Do we have problems? What are the causes? What's important? What can we do better? We do it. We test our plan, implement it, make sure that everybody's committed, check and make sure that it worked. If it didn't work, then we start the process again. If it did, we write the procedure and we implement that new procedure. Another basic idea of lean is something called an improvement board. There can be lots of different ways to do this. Again, it's usually a whiteboard type of a process. We use post-it notes. We set out what we can do, what's in progress, where we are, and whether or not those things have been completed. What kinds of things could we put on these whiteboards? We could put KPIs, key performance indicators, production indicators, quality indicators. We could have a maintenance schedule. We could have a board for supplies needed, harvesting and planting plans, treatments and vaccinations that we need to do, cows that need to be watched, problems that we've identified, to do actions for the day, for the week, or for the month. Where are priorities for the team? Who has skills within the team? What are holiday and vacation plans? What special projects do we need to do? And list any safety issues that have come up. So we can have various combinations. We can have one board, two boards, 10 boards. We can all have this in a place where people can see and communicate. So all that information is easily found, easily organized for all the employees in the operation. Of course, a key part of managing any process is developing standard operating procedures. Standard operating procedures are a form of visual communication. They're a center for communication. We put down what we're doing, when we do it, we describe that, we use lots of pictures so that it's easily communicated. It helps to introduce new staff. It makes sure that everybody in the team is using the same procedures. Particularly with cows, this is important because cows like consistency, and we involve and maintain that continuous improvement attitude with all the employees. With standard operating procedures, we're usually just focusing on the what and how. We do need the why. The why is going to be somewhere else where people might study that in more detail. But the really important thing with standard operating procedures is they need to be put where people use them. Too often I go on to farms and I see the SOPs are in a drawer. They're not where somebody can access and use them, and you can tell that nobody's ever turned those pages. SOPs are only useful if they're posted where the people can see them in the language of the employees that are doing and managing those processes. We focus on being very visual. We put pictures, we use text, but we maintain short and exact text to describe SOPs. Another important concept is to think about visible goal management. So we think about putting our goals where everybody can see them. And this gets into the concept of SMART goals. SMART goals are goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. When we set a goal, we need to make sure that that goal meets these criteria. We also go into the Six Sigma approach, which is focusing on defining what our issues are, measuring them, analyze, improve, and control. DMAIC. Define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. We use KPIs to do this. KPI stands for Key Performance Indicator. We need to define good KPIs. We want to focus on solving when they're not where we want them to be, analyze the system, review, and implement changes to improve our key performance indicators. So this is a simple chart that we could use for some KPIs where we have the items that we're in good shape for in green and the ones we need to improve on in red. We want to have, again, visible goal management. We connect the employees to the goals, make sure that people understand the business so that they're motivated to contribute to the success of the business. Very simple ways we can think about visible goal management. This is something that I really like to see in terms of milk quality, where we have the milk filter socks posted so that we can see how good of a job we're doing in each milking and cleaning the cows. Very visible, very easy to show differences among different shifts, and very visible, very visual. We can also post things like somatic cell count and mastitis incidence rates. Too often, we have our milkers, we tell them how important it is to manage and control somatic cell count, but we don't give them any indication of where we actually are. Well, I like to see this kind of a chart where we're visually showing people where we actually are, and again, that we're in the language of the people managing the process. We have to remember that KPIs are for everybody. I really like this board that I saw at a dairy a few years ago in Brazil, where they had all of their KPIs posted where everybody could see them, very visual, and they actually had the people responsible for each process put these numbers on the board themselves. We can also look at a process for how we handle deviations. What do we do when something goes wrong? So this is a form that we could use for systematic handling of deviations. What's the focus area? Analyze the root cause using something called a fishbone analysis, looking for possible solutions and suggestions. Go through that PDCA process, create an action plan, and make sure we follow up later to make sure that our new strategy is still working. Another concept of lean is something called 5S. 5S is about creating order in the workplace. The 5S's are sort, set in order, shine, standardize, and systemize. And we're going to go through each of these. So this is just an example of how we do 5S to a bunch of colored shapes. This is where we start out. There's no clear pattern. We start moving things around to create an order so that we do have a pattern of movement of items and placement of items. The benefits of 5S, we make sure that we ensure there's a standard way of doing things. It prevents delays, defects, and other wasteful occurrences. We have the right tools in the right place with the correct methods and the correct standards, and a nice and clean working area that's more pleasant to work in. Again, we do these spaghetti diagrams so that we design the workplace correctly. Let's look at an example barn. Here we have a barn that has 10 different actions all mixed together. We have a boat, we have fertilizer, we have wood that's piled up, we have storage of different types of material, parking of wagons, machines that are just sitting around for maintenance, storing of spare parts. We have temporary parking for equipment to avoid freezing. We have repair machines. We have grease and oil for maintenance. All this stuff is all over the barn. And I see these kinds of facilities all the time. And I would say, even to be honest, that some of my house is probably like this. There's no order there. There's no plan. We have all kinds of things at different places and all kinds of disorganization without functions together. We could focus on how we better design the workplace. Make an overall plan. How we want the site organized. Separate stock from working areas. Separate different functions in different areas and organize the flow in and out. This is an example of where we have a messy feed system. So this is not 5S. Here's an example of moving an office from not 5S to 5S. Disorganized on the left, very organized and orderly on the right. Here's 5S in a calf barn, a very organized, neat, clean calf barn. Here's a barn that I visited a couple of years ago in Idaho. We can see again here, very organized, very focused on cleaning, this farm was actually cleaning the waters every single day. Another concept we can think about for 5S is just putting labels. How many times do we miscommunicate which cow goes in which pen because we know what we're talking about, but we don't necessarily think about how our employees may not know. So just having simple things like numbers for pens. This is pin 134. Move that cow to pin 3. Very obvious in these examples. Or labels for feed. Simple things that we can do that can really improve communication and minimize waste and errors in the operation. If we're trying to apply 5S to an existing facility, we can often take these post-it notes again and look at things and divide them up into 3 categories. Green are for things that we often use, yellow for things that we sometimes use, and red are for things that we never use. And we create this red tag area. This is where we put things that are never used. We leave them there for a couple of weeks or a month or something to make sure that nobody uses them, and then maybe we get rid of them if nobody's actually used them. We can focus on setting an order, only the necessary items in the right area. Discuss how we place things effectively. Make sure that everything has its own home and we mark the items. You can see a shovel here where we've marked it red and put a clear home for that red shovel. And that needs to go back at the end whenever people have used it. If we just label things with colors, we could do red for feed equipment, green for manure equipment, anything like that can really help us make sure that we're using the right tools for the right purpose. Again, we color things, we make them visual. We have in the example here, maybe the blue bins are for tools for the milking parlor. The white bins are for tractors, and the green pins are for CAD equipment or something like that. So we can organize things in this way so that we minimize the amount of time we spend just looking for things. Here's an example of how we set an order for a dairy for medical systems. You can see very organized, things are labeled, things clearly have their place in this operation. Or we could think about something as simple as just putting colored chains on cows for group management. Then it's very easy to know when animals are not in the right group. The orange cows are pin 1, the yellow cows are pin 2, and if we see an animal with the wrong chain in the wrong group, then we know we need to move that animal. It's much easier than going back and checking a list to see if we have the wrong animal in the wrong pen. Or we could do something as simple as separate colored buckets for water and feed. All these kinds of things help tremendously in creating a lean dairy farm. We also focus on shine. We clean up the place, repair the floors, paint, make things shine, make things neater. This is a farm that I worked with a couple of years ago where we were having some milk quality issues. I walked into the parlor and I saw this and I realized there was a culture problem. You can see here there are a lot of items that are very dirty, probably things that have been there for many months, not organized, and it creates the idea that cleanliness is not important. So we talked to the dairy farm and said, you have to create a culture of cleanliness, and you're not doing that. You're sending the wrong message to your milkers, and that communicates to them that it's not important to keep things clean. And of course, we know that managing milk quality is very much about keeping things clean. So a couple of days later, they went through a massive cleaning exercise, and that was the first step in them setting priorities to improve the cleanliness of the operation. It changed the culture, and along with, of course, a number of other management changes, they were able to reduce their somatic cell count. Here's another set of examples of shine, very clean, very organized, much nicer environment to work in. We can standardize things, standardize the way we work, take pictures so that it's easy to see the way things are supposed to be, and again, focus a lot on colors and marking so we know how things are supposed to be used, which things are supposed to be used where, and it's very easy for new people to understand. And then after we do all that, we sustain. Sustain the discipline. Make it a habit to keep things in the right order, in the right place, in the right time. Make sure we do audits. We have to follow up. So we have this kind of an audit sheet that we can use to follow up and make sure that we're following the 5S process correctly. Of course, there's a lot involved in lean, and this is really just an introduction to lean dairy farming and lean concept. It's important to remember, though, that lean is a culture. It's not just something that one person comes in and says, we're going to go lean. It has to be something that everybody in the operation is involved in. If everybody's not involved in it, it's not going to work. It takes time, it takes effort, but the idea is that we spend some money or some time up front to implement lean so that we minimize waste in time in the future. When you think about lean, you may think, maybe I'm not going to go fully lean. There are various pieces of this that might work. Some companies go full lean and they make it a very important part of their culture. Other companies may pick and choose various pieces of the lean process. Here's some books that if you want to read a bit more about this, these are all books that you can get from sources like Amazon. Lean in Agriculture, that's written by Suzanne and one of her colleagues. This is a book that I've used the most. There's also a book called The Lean Dairy Farm that's written from some dairy farmers in New Zealand, and The Lean Farm, which is a bit more focused on agriculture beyond the animal. But all of these books have a lot of really good information if you really want to dig into the lean concept a bit deeper. There's my contact information if you want to learn anything more about lean or think about strategizing lean for your dairy operation. Don't hesitate to reach out. And if you're interested in learning more, feel free to go to Suzanne's website, which is listed there. Thank you for your time.